Narrator. What is the ultimate price of a human soul? Is it a mountain of flawless diamonds, a prosperous kingdom, or perhaps merely 15 cold, rusted gold coins? History has always concealed a terrifying truth. The most catastrophic bargains are never written in blood on parchment. Rather, they are carved deep into the flesh of the greedy during their final, agonizing moments of existence. When a man dares to weigh the beating heart of his own child against lifeless metal, he does not just sell a slave, he signs a blood pact with the devil and personally obliterates the gates, holding back his own slaughter. You are about to witness a transaction so vile, so thoroughly drenched in the stench of moral decay, that it awakened the most ruthless wrath the northern continent has ever endured. The frail girl they sold for pennies was far from who they believed her to be, and the apocalyptic bloodbath that followed will force you to question every judgment you have ever made in your life. Wolf King Stories warmly welcomes you all to our channel. If you find yourself deeply captivated by tales where karma strikes with the unrelenting fury of a winter storm, please do not hesitate to hit that subscribe button to support us. Your subscription gives us the tremendous motivation needed to continue bringing you these legendary stories in the future. Our tragedy begins amidst the most brutal winter the northern borders had ever faced. The blistering wind howled like millions of restless phantoms denied their passage to the afterlife, violently tearing through the barren, skeletal trees and battering the rotting wooden walls of a forgotten cabin. The world outside was entirely swallowed by an apocalyptic, freezing whiteness, a desperate, suffocating color that seemed to consume all warmth and hope. Yet, the true freezing temperature did not emanate from the snowstorm. It bled directly from the hearts of the men inside that cabin, where a transaction of profound cruelty was unfolding. Ethan Carter, a man who disgracefully wore the sacred title of a foster father, hunched over a cracked wooden table. His bloodshot eyes gleamed with a bottomless, sickening greed as his calloused fingers eagerly stroked the gold. Across from him sat a notorious slaver, a predator whose face was heavily scarred by frost and devoid of any humanity, wearing a permanent, malicious sneer. And there, in the darkest, most freezing corner of the room, huddled a tiny, trembling silhouette. It was Clara. 15 gold coins. That was the pathetic ransom Ethan demanded to discard the child he had taken in over a decade ago. Ethan Carter. Take her. 15 coins and she's yours. She's useless to me anyway, just another hungry mouth I'm tired of feeding. Narrator. The metallic clinking of the coins against the wood sounded like a victorious symphony to the terrible father, but to the listening universe, it was the steady, rhythmic banging of a judge's gavel sentencing them both to absolute doom. The slaver cast a disgusting, pitying look at Clara. He saw only a frail girl with a soot-stained face, her delicate hands brutally scarred from years of agonizing forced labor in the very place she called home. Wrapped in nothing but a patched, threadbare woolen cloak, she looked entirely broken. The slaver chuckled, utterly convinced he had scored a magnificent bargain, a cheap piece of flesh to be thrown into the brutal southern mines. They looked at her through the cloudy, arrogant eyes of mortals. They measured the vastness of a universe by the dirt on its surface. Ethan saw only a burden, a useless mouth to feed. The slaver saw only a commodity to exploit. Neither of these blind fools could perceive the devastating truth. They could not see that behind her soot-stained face, behind those crystal-clear eyes that held oceans of silent sorrow, lay a dormant secret powerful enough to shatter empires and bring the fiercest kings to their bleeding knees. Humanity is fatally flawed in its arrogance. We are conditioned to believe that true power and absolute royalty must arrive cloaked in velvet, heralded by deafening trumpets. We forget that the most destructive forces, the most ancient sovereign bloodlines, are often buried beneath the cruelest jokes of fate. As Ethan greedily swept the gold into his pouch, and as the slaver violently dragged Clara by her fragile wrists out into the freezing slave carriage, they chuckled at their cleverness. They mocked the misery of a helpless creature, utterly oblivious to the fact that their arrogant laughter was already echoing in the deepest chambers of hell. They did not know that by chaining her, they were wrapping the chains of damnation around their own necks, soon to be answered by the heavy, unforgiving blade of absolute retribution. Narrator. As the slave carriage vanished into the suffocating blizzard, leaving behind a cabin bought with cursed gold, the very fabric of the northern wilderness began to shift in terrifying ways. I have spent a lifetime studying the macabre tapestry of human cruelty, yet the profound ignorance of the wicked never ceases to astound me. Inside that rattling wooden cage on wheels, the air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, raw terror, and freezing mud. The slaver, a vile creature whose soul was as deformed as his frostbitten face, sat at the front, violently cracking his leather whip against the backs of the exhausted draft horses. He hummed a tuneless, discordant melody, his mind drunkenly dancing with visions of the silver and copper he would trade Clara for at the southern pits. He did not look back at the merchandise. He did not notice that while the other captive children wept in the darkness, their tears freezing to their hollow cheeks, Clara sat in absolute, terrifying stillness. The threadbare cloak draped over her frail shoulders should have been entirely insufficient against the biting frost, yet she did not shiver. If you had been there, if you possessed even a fraction of spiritual sight, you would have noticed that the snowflakes blowing through the wooden slats did not melt against her skin. They seemed to bow, hovering inches from her face as if pausing in quiet reverence. The storm outside was rapidly mutating from a mere seasonal hazard into an unnatural phenomenon of catastrophic proportions. The howling wind no longer sounded like moving air. It had deepened into a guttural, resonant frequency that mirrored the rhythmic beating of war drums. The slaver, blinded by his own arrogant greed, cursed the weather, pulling his fur collar tighter and lashing the horses with renewed, desperate fury. He believed he was simply battling a severe winter squall, completely oblivious to the reality that he was driving his carriage directly into the gaping maw of an ancient, awakened rat. Nature itself was staging a rebellion. The towering pines, weighed down by centuries of ice, began to groan and snap, crashing down across the path to block any chance of retreat. It started as a subtle vibration in the ice beneath the carriage wheels, a rhythmic tremor that slowly escalated into a deafening, earth-shattering rumble. The horses panicked first, their primal instincts recognizing the apex predators lurking within the blinding white veil. They reared up, screaming in terror, snapping their leather traces, and plunging the carriage into a snowbank. The slaver cursed violently, reaching for the heavy iron broadsword strapped to his waist as he stumbled out into the knee-deep snow. He expected to find bandits or perhaps a stray pack of starved timber wolves. What materialized from the blizzard, however, was a sight that would shatter his sanity into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Shadow's massive, towering silhouettes began to detach themselves from the whiteout. They were not mere wolves, nor were they ordinary men. These were the elite Lycan Vanguard of the Northern Crown, standing 8 feet tall, clad in heavy black iron armor that seemed to absorb the meager light of the winter moon. Their eyes glowed with a feral, terrifying crimson radiance, piercing through the storm like hellfire. They did not rush the carriage. They did not roar or snarl. Their silence was infinitely more horrifying than any battle cry. They moved with absolute, disciplined synchronization, forming a massive, impenetrable circle around the overturned carriage. The slaver's bravado instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, suffocating dread that seized his heart. His sword slipped from his trembling, numb fingers, plunging uselessly into the snow. He finally realized in a moment of paralyzing clarity that he was not the predator in this frozen wasteland. He was merely a trespassing insect about to be crushed beneath the boot of a titan. Narrator. The shattering of the slaver's fragile arrogance echoed not merely as breaking metal, but as the deafening roar of a slumbering empire finally opening its eyes to claim what was stolen. The crimson-eyed vanguard parted in unison, bowing their massive, armored heads in a gesture of absolute, unyielding submission as a singular figure emerged from the chaotic blizzard. It was the Wolf King himself. He did not walk, he seemed to glide over the snow, his presence so overwhelmingly suffocating that the very air pressure plummeted. He was a mountain of a man, draped in pelts of mythical beasts, his silver hair whipping violently in the wind, but it was his eyes that carried the true horror of the cosmos. They were pools of ancient, glacial ice, devoid of any warmth or mercy, locked entirely on the broken slave carriage. When he raised a gauntleted hand, the raging blizzard instantly ceased, the roaring wind dying into a breathless, unnatural silence, as if the sky itself dared not interrupt his judgment. The slaver fell to his knees, his mind fracturing as the absolute absurdity of his situation crashed down upon him. He had spent his miserable life trading desperate peasants and forgotten orphans, yet here he was, surrounded by a myth that mothers whispered to frighten their children. He watched, utterly paralyzed, as the Wolf King bypassed him completely, ignoring him as one ignores the dirt beneath their boots, and walked toward the wooden cage. With a single, effortless twist of his armored hand, the king ripped the heavy iron door from its hinges, tossing it aside like dried parchment. When the king knelt in the freezing mud before the tiny, soot-stained girl, the entire universe seemed to hold its breath. He reached out, his terrifying, blood-stained gauntlets trembling with an emotion so raw and profound it defied language. "Alpha King Lucian, my child, my sovereign. Forgive me for taking 10 agonizing years to find you." Narrator. Clara looked up, her crystal-clear eyes finally shedding the heavy veil of a slave. She did not flinch. As the king gently touched her cheek, the soot and dirt began to flake away, revealing the undeniable, striking silver markings of the royal bloodline beneath her skin. This was no discarded orphan. This was the stolen heir to the northern throne, the lost sovereign whose disappearance had plunged an entire continent into a decade of bloody mourning. The slaver's vocal cords finally snapped into action, emitting a pathetic, high-pitched wail. He threw himself into the snow, groveling, weeping, offering the pathetic 15 gold coins, screaming that he did not know, that he was only a merchant, that the foster father was the one to blame. I have always found a dark, poetic irony in the way cruel men plead for mercy. They inflict unimaginable agony upon the defenseless, yet the moment the scales of power tip, they demand a compassion they have never once shown to another living soul. The Wolf King slowly stood, turning his glacial gaze upon the weeping worm in the snow. He did not shout, he did not draw a blade. He merely whispered a single command in an ancient tongue that made the earth violently shudder. 2 of the towering Lycan guard stepped forward, hoisting the slaver by his arms as if he weighed nothing at all. They did not kill him, death would have been an unearned sanctuary. Instead, they stripped him of his furs, wrapping the very iron chains he had used to bind the children tightly around his bare, freezing flesh. He was left chained to the rotting wood of his own ruined carriage in the heart of the cursed wilderness, condemned to feel the agonizing, slow bite of the winter he thought he had conquered. As the king wrapped his own majestic, velvet-lined cloak around Clara's fragile shoulders, lifting her from the filth, the screams of the slaver were quickly swallowed by the returning blizzard, a fitting lullaby for a man who had traded his humanity for copper. Narrator. While the slaver's blood slowly froze beneath the unforgiving judgment of the winter night, miles away, the architect of this tragedy was foolishly attempting to warm his rotting hands over the embers of his betrayal. Ethan Carter sat perfectly still in his dilapidated cabin, entirely consumed by the hypnotic allure of his newly acquired wealth. The hearth fire was dying, casting long, grotesque shadows across the decaying wooden walls, but Ethan paid no mind to the encroaching cold. He was meticulously stacking and restacking the 15 rusted gold coins on the cracked table, listening to their metallic clink with a perverse, drug-like ecstasy. In his twisted, microscopic worldview, he had committed no sin. He had simply discarded a broken tool, cutting a heavy anchor from his life to secure his own survival. He envisioned the strong ale he would buy, the new boots, the warm bed at the village tavern. He was completely intoxicated by his own perceived brilliance, entirely deaf to the subtle, terrifying shifts occurring in the atmosphere outside his pathetic sanctuary. He did not notice that the ambient noises of the forest, the hooting of owls, the scuttling of vermin beneath the floorboards had vanished entirely. The air inside the cabin grew heavy, thick with a metallic tang that tasted like fresh blood and static electricity. When the Retribution finally arrived, it did not bother to knock. The heavy oaken door of the cabin did not just open, it exploded inward with the force of a detonated mortar, splintering into hundreds of lethal projectiles that embedded themselves into the walls. Ethan shrieked, tumbling backward over his wooden chair, desperately clawing at the table to protect his precious stack of gold as the freezing tempest violently invaded his home. He expected to see bandits, perhaps a disgruntled neighbor coming to rob him in the dead of night. But as the swirling snow settled, the silhouette that filled his doorway paralyzed the very breath in his lungs. It was the Wolf King, flanked by beasts so horrifyingly massive they had to stoop to enter the dwelling. But it was not the king that shattered Ethan's mind, it was the figure standing beside him. Clad in heavy, shimmering silver fox furs, her dark hair brushed clean of ash, wearing a delicate but unmistakable crown of woven ice and diamond upon her brow, was Clara, the useless burden. The slave he had sold for 15 coins just hours prior. She looked down at him not with the terrified, submissive eyes of a beaten child, but with the cold, ancient authority of a sovereign judging a traitor. Ethan's psychological collapse was instantaneous and agonizing to witness. His mind violently rejected the reality before him. He crawled backward against the stone hearth, his hands trembling violently as he tried to piece together a defense. Ethan Carter. Clara, my daughter, I was protecting you. The slaver tricked me. I kept you safe for 10 years. The gold means nothing to me. Narrator. The coward's instinct kicked in, and he attempted to wield the only weapon he had left: manipulation. He began to weep, crying out her name, screaming about how he had fed her, how he had kept her safe from the wolves for 10 years, how the slaver had tricked him, how the gold meant nothing compared to his love for his daughter. It is truly nauseating to witness a parasite attempt to claim credit for the survival of its host. Ethan, a man who had forced a royal heir to eat scraps from the floor and scrub his floors until her knuckles bled, was now desperately invoking the sacred bonds of family to save his own miserable skin. Clara did not utter a single word in response. She simply looked at the 15 gold coins scattered across the filthy floorboards. Her silence was a suffocating weight, a perfect mirror reflecting the grotesque, unredeemable ugliness of Ethan's soul back at him. He had possessed a literal god beneath his roof, a being capable of showering him with unimaginable wealth and eternal protection, and in his blind, staggering ignorance, he had sold his salvation for pocket change. Narrator. The hollow pleas of a treacherous father fell upon ears that had finally been unsealed from the heavy, suffocating burden of false familial devotion. Clara turned her back on Ethan, her majestic fur cloak sweeping over the snow-dusted floorboards, and silently walked out into the waiting storm, leaving the architect of her misery to the mercy of the king. The Wolf King stepped fully into the cabin, his massive boots crushing the fallen splinters of the door. He looked at the sniveling man cowering against the hearth, and then his glowing glacial eyes shifted to the gold scattered on the floor. There was no rage in the king's expression, only a profound, chilling disgust. Alpha King Lucian. You place such immense value on these trinkets. You weighed the soul of a star against the dirt of the earth. It is only fitting that you keep what you have earned, forever. Narrator. The Lycan guards moved with terrifying efficiency. They did not unsheath their weapons. Instead, they seized Ethan, ignoring his frantic, pathetic screams, and dragged him toward the heavy iron forge in the corner of the room, the very forge Clara had been forced to pump the bellows for day and night. They stoked the dying embers with a dark, unnatural magic until the flames roared white-hot. They gathered the 15 gold coins, placing them into a crucible, until the metal liquefied into a glowing, bubbling pool of molten greed. Ethan thrashed wildly, his screams tearing his own throat raw as the realization of his sentence dawned on him. They did not pour it over his head or end his life quickly. With agonizing precision, They bound his hands and pressed the molten gold directly into his calloused palms, forging the coins into his flesh, ensuring he would never, ever be able to let go of the wealth he had sacrificed his humanity to obtain. They left him there, locked from the outside, the walls reinforced by solid, unbreakable sheets of magical ice. Ethan was entombed in his own home, left to freeze in the agonizing darkness, his hands permanently melded to the 15 coins that had bought his eternal damnation. He would spend his final, delirious days staring at the gold, realizing too late that metal cannot provide warmth, cannot offer salvation, and cannot buy back a soul once it has been willingly handed over to the devil. When the royal procession finally marched away, returning to the majestic peaks of the Northern Kingdom, the blizzard instantly vanished, leaving behind a perfectly silent, sunlit morning. Clara took her rightful place upon the throne of frost, her reign ushering in an era of unprecedented prosperity and ruthless justice. She never once looked back at the forgotten cabin in the woods. As we pull back the veil on this tragedy, we are left with a chilling reflection on the nature of value. What is the ultimate price of a human soul? We learn, through the horrific fate of Ethan Carter, that true wealth is never measured by the metal in our pockets, but by the compassion we harbor in our hearts when no one is watching. Karma is not merely a cosmic concept, it is an incredibly patient hunter. It allows the greedy to build their own cages, step inside, and lock the door themselves before it finally throws away the key. The universe keeps a meticulous ledger, and every act of cruelty, no matter how deeply buried in the snow, will eventually thaw, demanding a repayment in blood. Thank you for walking through this dark, unforgettable journey with us tonight on Wolf King Stories. If the heavy blade of karma in this tale resonated with your soul, please leave your thoughts in the comments below, and remember to subscribe so we can continue bringing you the most epic legends the world has forgotten. Until we meet again in the shadows of the next story, guard your hearts, tread carefully, and never forget that a king might just be hiding beneath the rags of a beggar. The chilling saga of the Wolf King and the stolen heir serves as a haunting reminder of the inescapable scales of cosmic justice. In this tale, we witness two distinct manifestations of human greed: the slaver, who traded flesh for copper, and Ethan Carter, a treacherous guardian who discarded a divine blessing for a handful of rusted gold. Both men believed they were the masters of their own fates, cleverly manipulating the world for their selfish gain. Yet, they were utterly blind to the reality that they were merely securing their own agonizing downfalls. Clara's transformation from a soot-stained, abused slave into a majestic sovereign highlights the profound truth that inherent worth cannot be extinguished by cruelty or obscured by poverty. The frozen wasteland acted as the ultimate judge, stripping away the illusions of power and worldly wealth, leaving nothing but the raw, unvarnished truth of their actions. Ethan's punishment, his hands permanently melded to the very coins that bought his damnation, is a poetic testament to the suffocating nature of unchecked avarice. Ultimately, the story illustrates that the universe does not forget. It watches quietly, allowing the wicked to construct their own prisons out of their malicious choices, before delivering a retribution so exact and profound that it echoes through eternity. The deepest lesson hidden within this frozen legend is that true value is never determined by external circumstances, and human cruelty is a debt that always demands repayment. Material wealth obtained through the exploitation, manipulation, or neglect of others is not a victory. It is a cursed weight that will eventually destroy the soul. True wealth is measured entirely by the integrity of our character and the compassion we show to those who can offer us nothing in return. In our fast-paced, modern world, it is terrifyingly easy to fall into the trap of measuring success by financial gain, social status, or personal convenience. We often overlook or discard people who do not immediately serve our personal goals. To apply this lesson today, we must consciously shift our perspective to recognize the inherent dignity in every person we encounter, especially the vulnerable. Practice unseen kindness. Refuse to step on others to climb your own ladder of success. Understand that every interaction is a thread in the tapestry of your own karma. Treat the unseen and the overlooked with the same respect you would offer a king, for you never know the true potential or destiny resting beneath someone's humble exterior. Which character's fate do you think was more terrifying? Poetic justice, the slaver chained to his own ruined carriage in the blizzard, or the foster father eternally trapped with his molten gold? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to read your perspectives so our community can discuss and learn from each other's viewpoints. If this story resonated with your soul, please hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Your subscription gives us the greatest motivation to keep producing and bringing you more epic, thought-provoking legends next time.